All right, so I'm recording this. If you don't want me to record you or your voice or your image, please let me know. You can email me and I can try to strike out the discussions that if you're involved, okay? Just to letting you know we are recording this. And the reason for that is I'm gonna put up this video later on for others who are not able to make the lecture. So managing resistance to change. What is resistance to change? Now, this is pretty common. We've talked about this before, but when somebody needs to change his behavior and if he has got into the habit of doing things in a certain way, it's only natural. This is something that happens to most people where they say, do I need to do this? Do I need to change? I'd rather not change. And oftentimes they will complain. A great example is today's video or today's lecture. We're doing this online. And for many people, they're not used to it. They would rather sit in a classroom and listen to a lecturer. But now here we are looking at it on the video, and there may be some of you who are resisting this. Some of you might say, well, I can't do this. I'm going to put my name up there and then go and have a cup of coffee at the back. And then when the lecturer is calling me, I'm not there because I can't be bothered. This is too difficult for me. So that's an example of resistance to change. And it's expected. And in fact, I will say that rather than discourage resistance, it should be managed and used as a resource. Okay, so in other words, if you're the manager and you're trying to implement change, don't be surprised if your subordinates say to you, do we have to do this? They might complain, it's not really a lot of fun doing this. Can we not change? Can we just go back to what we used to do? So, and the first point is it's expected for any attempt to alter the status quo, in other words, to change things from what they used to be. Most subordinates or most employees will actually have a resistance. There are a lot of lecturers right now who are complaining when they're giving this lecture that it's really difficult to get some reactions from the students. And that, again, is a form of resistance to change. But it's better than nothing. Doing things online is probably the best option considering that we've got this coronavirus ongoing. So and people will accept this change if they understand that there is a benefit to this change. So obviously, if you stay home, if you learn online, you resist. Sorry, you bring down the risk of you contracting the virus, which is a huge benefit. And if people just focus on that benefit, then usually the resistance becomes less. Okay, so let's go on. Reactions to change. People often will defend something they find as important, and if that thing is important and it's threatened by change, then they will resist it. Okay, so an example might be if a company is trying to reduce its workforce to try to save up on money, it's not surprising people, of course, protest and say, you don't have to reduce your manpower. You're a rich company, things like that. So that's an example of, again, resistance, and it's only expected. We know that happens. Who wants to lose money anyway? I mean, none of you. If you lose your job, and many of you have, we understand that almost half our students, if not more, have actually lost their jobs. And of course, that is something really terrible for most of you. And it really hits you in your pocket. And that's a perfect reason for you to resist this change that's happening. In organizations, oftentimes, many managers or many employees, rather than protest, they will just keep quiet. So silence is not, we shouldn't see silence as evidence that people agree with the change. Oftentimes when there is silence, it might actually mean they don't like the change, but they would rather not speak up, okay? So, and that's why I encourage students when I'm doing something, and I always try to get you out of your shell to speak up, because uh, if you are silent, it often means that you're fearing a negative feedback. Okay, so if you speak up and you say, I don't like this, will your lecturer actually encourage you to speak up, or will he say, well, you don't like this, but you're stupid and you should shut up? Okay, and that is a typical actually reaction of many managers to people who resist change, and that's not the right thing, because if you insult your employee who is resisting a change, that employee will end up forever not speaking out. Okay, and that's actually a bad thing, because whatever resistance can again be used by the manager to find out how can I improve my change management process. But if nobody speaks up, obviously, then you can't improve anything. So a lot of people attack the source of the change, and which promotes a climate of silence. So a lot of managers who fear negative feedback from their subordinates. If a subordinate speaks up, then he feels that's a personal attack, and if he defends himself very vigorously, then usually that means that the employee will not speak up from the future. Cynicism, which is basically when people don't believe managers. If a manager says, okay, we're doing this change because we want to improve operations, then usually cynicism will come in, and the employee might say, oh, he actually wants to do this change because it makes his job easier, but it makes our lives harder. So that's an example of cynicism, when you don't believe the reason why people are making a change. Okay, some employees might think that there's a personal agenda, a personal reason why a manager is trying to implement change. So the other thing that can happen, this cynicism, by the way, increases, especially when you may have an agreement with your manager. You have an understanding of the way you will work. For example, you have an understanding that, okay, I'm going to work this shift from 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock every day. That's my shift. I need to come to work at that time. But then one day your manager says, well, I'm going to break that agreement, and from now on, I'm going to give you the night shift. And you come in at 11 p.m. or something like that. And that's an employee will probably not like that, because he or she might feel, well, we had an agreement and you broke that agreement. So when that happens, there's a climate of distrust. In other words, the employee will not trust the manager because of that broken promise. Okay, why people resist change. By the way, these are all really important points, and I get these particular points from a book by Schermerhorn, and you can see that at the very bottom of the slide. And the reason why I point that out is, in your assignment, I might be asking you to cite research. In other words, you might have to cite, if you use any of these points as a way of explaining your case study, I would require that you reference where you got it from. So rather than saying, oh, I got it from Mr. Valdez, slide number 4, you don't do that, because I'm not the author of this. I'm just the lecturer. The author of this is actually Schermerhorn, Davidson, Factor, etc. So when you cite any of these points, you should be using this as your reference, okay? But I encourage you nevertheless to use the slides as your main research source, the slides or your textbook, okay? So when you're doing an assignment, you're supporting whatever you're writing down. The best source of research is actually not the internet, it's your textbook. I can find my textbook. Right? I don't have it with me right now. But yeah, your textbook, I have it somewhere here. I can find it. Hmm. I thought I had it, but I guess I don't. Oh, there it is. Oh, that's not it. Anyway, sorry, I thought I had my textbook with me. I've got somebody doing a chat here. All right. Um, can I just remind people that I don't pay attention to this chat as often as I should. All right. So if you want to grab my attention, the best way is just to speak up, unmute yourself, and say something so that I can respond to you. If you send me a chat, oftentimes I won't be able to see it in time. Okay, let's go on with the lecture. Why do people resist change? There are a couple of reasons. In fact, there are many reasons. And this particular set of reasons or sources of resistance to change comes from Schermerhorn. And he says that number one is there's a fear of the unknown. So people don't know, they don't understand what is happening, and therefore they're scared of whatever consequence might happen. So students might be afraid of doing online subjects because they don't understand the reason for going online, or they fear that they may fail because they're not very good at learning online. Another reason is a disrupted habit. So you feel upset when old ways of doing things can't be followed. Loss of confidence, feeling incapable of performing well under the new ways of doing things. So if you don't know how to use Zoom, for example, that could be a reason why you are feeling anxious and you're not confident, and therefore that could be a reason for you to resist this kind of change. People who lose control, if let's say you're very used to doing something and you know it very well, you can control things, and suddenly the change takes that away from you, that is a loss of control. And again, people will resist change because of that. I'm not going to go through all of this. We don't really have the time, but it's sufficient for everyone to know. In fact, you should go over this on your own for more information. But when I ask a student, try to identify the sources of resistance to change, these are among the sources of resistance to change that I want you to quote when you're explaining why there is resistance to change. Okay, so an example of that might be work overload. So you're resisting a change. There's a new software that's being placed, and you're supposed to learn it. Is Amna there, by the way? Amna, can I use
Yes,
you?
yes, David.
Yeah, can I use
Sorry,
your
yes.
example? I'd like to use your example. I
Yes,
recall
please.
you were saying that in your place of work, you suddenly had to learn this new software that they made you do.
Yes.
And I'm sure you felt, while you were learning this new software, you may have felt a little bit overwhelmed, that you need to learn some things. And you might feel like you're working so hard because, again, you might be even operating two systems at the same time, and that
Yes, we
doubles the
do.
amount of information, or doubles the amount of work that you need to do, correct?
That's right, because we do like multiple things at one time, so it was very hard for me to learn something new all of a sudden.
Absolutely. So change often results in a work overload. Many of you actually, well, not many of you, all of you will have a case study. And in your case study, there is a problem. And in that problem, the problem usually involves resistance to change. So the people in the case study are resisting the change that management is trying to implement. And it could be, in one case, I think it's builder center case, wherein the employees are resisting the new software because they weren't given enough time to learn it. And because of that, they were struggling to use it. And, they were working overtime to understand how to use the software, etc. So that is an example of work overload. Okay, so another slide, another set of reasons why people would resist change. And this time it's coming from Oreg. And again, I'm not going to go through all of that. I expect that you'll go over that on your own. But some notable mention would be, this is similar to what we talked about a while ago, reluctance to lose control. There's cognitive rigidity, which means that you're very close-minded. You're not open to new change because you feel everything that's new will probably be not as good as the old way. That's an example of cognitive rigidity. You are rigid. You don't like new suggestions. Okay. Again, not all of these will come into place. Sometimes the reason will be cognitive rigidity, but sometimes it could be a simple reluctance to give up an old habit. Or some people don't like the novelty of change. Some people just prefer, you know, not being challenged. They don't like having to do new things or learn new things. That's a, you know, that could be just a personality issue. Again, each one is different. You could have a combination of these reasons coming to play when there is resistance to change. Here's another one. This time this comes from Del Val and Martinez. So um, they're saying that one of the reasons why there's resistance is because of motivation. So there's low motivation for change. Why would I change? There's nothing in it for me. You know, it might be expensive for me to do that change because I might have to learn something new and spend more time. Sometimes people don't see the need for change. So, you know, somebody's saying, okay, we're going to use this new software. And then you say, well, what's wrong with the old software? So if you don't understand that, the automatic reaction is to say, no, I don't want to learn that new software because what was wrong with the old software, right? So obviously, if you're the change manager, this is what I've been saying, repeating over and over again, which is when you're introducing something new, you have to explain to the people affected why you are doing the change. What is so good about this new software that will make things easier for the employee in the long run? Obviously, when you're using something new, it'll take you some time to get used to it, which is true for most software, right? If you're learning something new, like a new phone, a new operating system, like if you move from Apple to Samsung or Samsung to Apple, usually you will struggle. Has anybody done that, by the way? Anyone can share their experience when you used to use an Apple phone, perhaps, and you moved to Samsung or moved to Android, rather, Android to Apple? Anyone? No one?
It was really hard.
It was really hard. Okay, Trang, can you share your experience? Were you using perhaps an Android and then you moved to Apple, or the other way around?
Yeah, I'm other way around. So
Which?
the
Yeah.
first I have been using the Apple for I think for 12 years. For
Okay.
12, and then I just changed to Android this year, and then oh my god, absolutely different. And I get I get
You
stuck.
struggle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's the very similar experience to a lot of people when they learn something new. Look, sometimes there is a reason why you make a change, but sometimes people make a change and they don't really explain why there is that change, and that's the worst when people are not explaining to you. Obviously, Trang, there was a reason why. Why did you move from an Apple to a Samsung, or sorry, to an Android?
Like a in accidentally I just lost my phone last year, and then
Okay.
and then at that time my financial like unable to buy a new Apple because the price quite high, because if I want to buy the new phone the price kind of I want to buy the newest one, so that's why I just buy the Samsung one, and then a bit save money, and then I can buy the Apple later. The new.
No, that's fine. That's actually a perfectly good reason. So there is a benefit to the change, isn't it? If you think about it, there's a benefit. The benefit is it's cheaper.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
actually.
But imagine if you didn't explain that. If you went up to a person and told that person, "Give me your iPhone and here's an Android phone," and I won't explain why. I'll just steal that from you and give that to you. you you can imagine how angry that person would be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yes.
if you explain to the person why you're changing it for whatever benefit there is, you might say this is cheaper, or it has more features, or it helps you connect with other people who are using Android phone. If the whole company is using an Android phone, then you may have little choice but to use an Android phone, for um, so that it's easier. I don't know. So for the systems can talk to each other in a more without any hiccups. Chu Kiao, I think you raised your hand a while ago. Do you have something to share?
Yes. Just Android to Apple.
Okay. Did you have a little bit of difficulty?
Yes, because when you use the Android phone, you can download any application from internet. But when you use iPhone, you can only download the app in the App Store.
Yeah.
So maybe, and because I come from China, and there are some application is just in Chinese App Store. You can't download it on the Australia store, so it's more difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, when you're pressed with change, personal change, oftentimes what people want to do is they want to wait. They want to say, okay, there's some disadvantages to this new change. There are some advantages to this new change. And then you do an evaluation, say, okay, yes, I'm going to have a little bit of hard time, but at the end of the day, it's still better to learn this new system because eventually, on the long term, it will benefit me for whatever reason. Abdul, go ahead.
Yeah, some people used to say, If it's working, don't fix it." Is that correct?
That's true. Look, I mean that's true in many cases. Okay, and that's also what I would recommend to many managers. Okay, as much as possible, you don't want to do any changes unless it's really necessary, right? And if you have no choice, you really need to do that change. And yes, but if it's doing, if whatever you're working on, whatever system you're working on is working well anyway, then yes, there could be no reason for you to make that change. And if somebody forces you to make that change, that person had better explain why. Because if he doesn't, people will say, I don't want to make that change. Okay? All right, let's go on with the lecture. We're talking about resistance to change. We're talking about what scientists or some experts are saying are some of the reasons why people will resist some change. So here's another one. Same group of people. Sometimes there is a resistance to change because of political reasons. So a great example is if you hate your manager, and this is somebody that you can't stand because he's always giving you a hard time, whatever change that he offers you or that he's asking you to do, many people will resist that because not because it's a bad change or a good change or whatever reason, but if it's coming from this person that you hate, you will say, I don't want to have anything to do with that, whatever he's suggesting. Okay, so that is a political reason why you're resisting a change. Another group of sources of resistance, this time coming from Grates and Rimmer. Now, this one's important. Economic reasons. Why would people resist change? There could be an economic reason. For example, if you're going to lose your job or you're going to lose some hours because of the change, then you're going to resist it, obviously, because it means less money for you. Okay, so other reasons could be inconvenience. One very common example of change is when you move offices. So if a company says, okay, we used to do our work in, say, in St. Kilda, but we're going to have to move. We're going to move to, say, Glen Waverly. All right. So A lot of people will say, huh, why are we moving office at St. Kilda? You know, it's near my house. And that's really inconvenient for me to have to move from St. Kilda to Glen Waverley. Again, that's an inconvenience, and that is a very common reason why people will resist this change. Okay, I've got Abdul who's still moving around. Abdul is upside down now. There you go. All right, going back to our slide here. Threats to interpersonal relationships. A change that threatens relationships among your good friends, for example, that could be a reason why they will resist it. What else? Okay, let's move on. Anyway, as I said, it's important for you to go over this and understand it on your own. All right, so I don't have time to go through each and every one of them. Here's another list. This time it's from Cook. Employees may know something that you do not know, which in fact may make the resistance not only understandable, but even correct. So this is a really important point. Now, if you're the manager implementing change, and if an employee resists this and say, boss, I don't think this is a good idea for you to implement this, don't automatically think that that person is wrong and you are right, okay, as the boss. There could be a very good reason why they don't want to implement the change, and it could be very valid, and they may know something that you may not know. So usually this is what happens. A manager tries to implement something, not knowing, you know, on the ground, the employees who are working with customers, they see things in a different way, and they may actually have some very valid reasons why they don't want to implement something, because it may mean a loss of a customer. All right, so people who are happy with the status quo will fight to protect it. So if you're happy with things, way things are, as Abdul earlier said, he said some people, you know, are saying that, hey, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. Okay, so because they're happy with the way things are, right? And if you try to change that, they will often fight to try to defend and make sure it continues as it is. No clear path between the current state and the new position. So in other words, yes, they may have a desire to change. This again from the ProSci-ADCAR model. Remember, awareness, desire, ability, knowledge, and then ability, and then I think reinforcement. So people may already have the awareness that they need to change. They may even want to change. They say, yes, it's important for us to do this, but I don't have the knowledge of how to change. I don't know how to use Zoom. I don't know how to use Excel. I don't know how to use, you know, whatever software it is. And because of that, they don't have the necessary skills to change. And therefore they will say, hey boss, don't implement it yet, because I don't know how to use the software that you want me to use. You have to give me some training first. Okay, so that's an example of resistance to change. And there could be a valid reason why your employees are saying, I don't want to do that. I'll give you an example. We've got a class, it's called Enterprise Skills, where we are doing some exercises on Excel. And we have a test, and it's based on an Excel test. And so students usually, we hold this class in the computer lab, where of course we have a copy of Excel there, and the students can use Excel. But what would happen if you do this change wherein everything is now online? You need to have access to your own computer, plus you need to have access to Excel. So obviously, if we say we've got a graded test, but you don't have a licensed copy of Excel, you can't take the test. And therefore, students would complain, well, how can I take this test if I don't have a copy of Excel? So that's an example of, again, a valid resistance to change. No role models for the new behaviors. I don't know how to make this change because I don't know how it looks like. I don't know anyone who has actually done this change. And so if you're the change manager, showing a good role model would help people understand how to do this change. In other words, they'll have the ability and the knowledge to make this change. Last but not the least, they need to understand why change is for them, for their interest. Okay, so if an employee doesn't realize that the change is for their immediate interest or for their interest, then they might say, well, that's just because the boss wants to do it, and therefore, there's nothing in it for me, so why should I accept this change? All right, change resistors may have important information that change agent needs to consider. So this is similar to what we were talking about earlier. Change agent needs skills to differentiate between a knee-jerk resistance and a considered resistance. In other words, if an employee is indeed resisting the change and is complaining that they don't want to do this change, if you're the change manager, you should try to understand, is this something that stems from a resistance because it's inconvenient for the employee, or is there something very more concrete in that resistance? In other words, they have a very valid complaint on why they can't undertake the change. So don't automatically think that resistance to change is wrong. Okay, so it might actually be a valid complaint. Another phenomenon now is what we call change fatigue, too much change. In companies nowadays, they want to implement something new, a new software, a new procedure. Almost every week, they're coming out with some new change program. And that can be very confusing to a student or to an employee if they want to do certain things and change every so often. For example, we're now using Zoom for our online sessions. What if one day the company says, well, we're going to stop using Zoom, we're going to be using Skype, or we're going to use Teams, or we're going to use some other software instead of Zoom? You might complain that, hey, we just started learning how to use Zoom and now you want us to change to another one. And then 2 weeks later, somebody comes back and says, no, we changed our mind. We're not going to use this software. We'll use another software. So you can see the pressure that goes into the employee. And if an employee has just learned something new and suddenly has to chuck that out and learn something new again, then it's just too much. It's possible to make the change, but we are overwhelmed by the number of things you want us to do at such a short period. That is what we call change fatigue. In other words, we're very tired of all these change programs that's happening. So well, I'm not gonna answer that. We'll just go on. Managerial responses to change. Managers have strategies to deal with change. Many of them are sympathetic. They empathize and they support people's responses. Many of them are very clear about why we're doing a change, which is really important. And the best actually approach is to ensure that there is participation among the people in the organization. In other words, get them to make suggestions on how we can implement this change. If you've got the time, especially, then you should really get them involved. Okay, the next slide is talking about, okay, now we know there's resistance to change. And assuming the resistance to change is something that we need to overcome, and in fact, we've already listened and we know there's no option for us but to actually implement this change, then if you're the manager, how do you try to reduce this resistance to change? And basically, there are 6 strategies that we need to go through. And generally, the first one is the most important one. Okay, so if you are encountering, as a change manager, some people saying, I don't want to change, the first step is to communicate the reason why we are making the change. Actually, you want to, there's actually several. Well, number one, communicate the kind of change that you are looking for. So what kind of change is required? Number two, why are we doing this change? Okay, that's those are the two important messages. And then the second is we need to learn how we're going to actually make this change. What new skills do you need to learn in order for you to implement the change? The third is involvement, which means as a manager, get your subordinates involved in understanding the change, get them involved in recommending solutions, and get them involved in actually expressing what they feel and expressing what is the thing that is difficult for them to implement. Okay, so all of these strategies come into play, as I said, but the first one, communication, is the most important and the first thing that you should be doing as a change manager. Fourth, stress management. Obviously, change involves a lot of stress. After we've done communication, learning, and involvement, some employees may still feel a lot of stress. If I may stop right here and ask you guys, how's the stress level for you guys right now? Do you feel any added stress knowing that you are doing your learning online? Okay, can I just stop for a moment there and go into this mode? Does anybody want to share their experiences? Do you feel any stress at this point?
Yes.
Okay, can you describe what kind of stress you're feeling and where is this coming from, this source of stress?
Just with my grades, like I don't want them to mess up because of this whole structure getting changed, like I like the typical classroom structure, more like face-to-face learning. Like, although I don't have any difficulty with my online classes, but it's just, I don't know, like I'm just worried about the exams, like how are we going to conduct them online? Will it affect my
Absolutely.
marks, grades? So just worried about that overall.
Yes, and that's what we call fear of the unknown, right? I think we talked
Yeah.
about that a couple of minutes ago. Fear of the unknown. I'm gonna pause the record that. A good example of reducing stress, especially when, let's say, you're about to do a presentation as a student. Who among you here has a fear of making presentations in front of class? Anyone? I'm sure some of you do. I'm going to, oh, there, Trang is saying, yes, she has a little bit of difficulty presenting because she gets stressed. But my advice to you is raise your confidence level, okay? How do you raise your confidence level? Practice. The more you practice, the better you get at doing it, the higher your confidence becomes, and the less stress you will feel, okay? And again, the other things will come into play like exercise, etc.